There's something about wanting to get your ideas into the world. Getting your foot in the door is difficult. It does help to know people. Production within an agency could involve anything from video editing to design. Oh my God, get a life, talk about your life a little bit.
Hi everyone, I'm in a new location today because we have a very special guest that's joining us. I'm Rabia, your hype girl in brand, and today we are joined with Mark Pollard. Mark has a very extensive career in advertising and he has worked at various creative agencies throughout his career. And he now runs an online community called Sweathead, where he teaches strategy and he brings strategists together from around the world. And he also makes a lot of very cool content on strategy. So thank you so much, Mark, for being here. It's so nice to see you. Welcome to Dubai.
You too. Thank you for having me.
For this podcast, I really wanted to understand what a career in advertising looks like, because a lot of the audience that we have on this channel, a lot of them are like in their mid-20s to like late 20s. They maybe have like a couple of years of work experience and they really are interested in marketing, brand management, advertising, but they're not quite sure how to like pivot from a career or how to like get into the career, etc. So you're an absolute expert because you have decades of experience. So I would really love to start with, how did you know that you wanted to join advertising? Like no 15-year-old is like, I'm going to be an advertising strategist.
No.
It's a very niche career. So what were the traits that made you think like, okay, I think I want to give this a go?
Well, the quick story, and then I'll get into the traits, is, I mean, I never thought about having a career. Like having a career was a bit of a thing back then, but I feel like people are kind of infatuated with it now. And, you know, when I'm in New York, I'll go to cafes and often work out at cafes. Everyone around me is talking about their boss and their career and my career. And it's like, oh my God, get a life, talk about your life a little bit. But for me, I've always been interested in writing and thinking and creativity. And in my teens, I was making websites, and through making websites about underground hip hop, graffiti, DJing, all that sort of stuff, I ended up getting a job in a digital agency. But I was making a magazine, a hip hop magazine on the side. I never thought about having an advertising career. And it wasn't until I was 28 that I became what's known as an account planner, which is a job that's been around for a bit over 50 years. It's from England. It's very English, very London minded. The DNA of it is very London. But I wasn't 28 until I had that role. And most of my career before then, and even for a few years after, was about balancing an interest in digital stuff, information architecture and user experience, with brand strategy, but we called it account planning. It was called account planning. So like a lot of people I know around my age, a lot of us kind of fell into the role because you don't tend to come out of college or university and become a strategist. You know, if you're 22 to 23 years old, do you really deserve the attention and respect of someone who's spending millions and millions of dollars? I don't know. It's not to say that you can't contribute, but it can take some time in the industry to find your footing. But for me, it was a little bit about luck. And then years later, I realized that it's a very privileged role because it's one of the few roles where you can be a bit quirky, be a student for life, love to read, love to nerd out, love ideas, love doing research, and you get paid for that. There aren't many roles like that in the world. I never really identified with being in advertising.
Okay.
And I think over even the past 15 years, the industries in most parts of the world, at least the parts that I've worked in, it's not as glamorous as it once was. When we talk about personality traits, there are 5 main personality traits that the psychologists tend to agree on: OCEAN, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Openness is basically about being interested in things, curiosity, variety, novelty seeking. So I think anybody who is in a creative or strategic role in advertising, you're going to need to be high in openness. And so when you're putting a team together, for example, the idea of being a strategist has become kind of cool. Like everyone wants to be a strategist. But most people who've been around for a while, who are building teams, they want to know what you're into. Like, are you into the world? And if so, what did you do on the weekend? What subreddits are you in? Have you ever like created a zine or been part of like a community radio show, for example, so that you can understand that that person is not just curious, but they do something about it. So that's probably one of the main traits that I think people look for. There are different kinds of strategists in advertising. Some, to be very simplistic, are more, I'd say more logical, maybe more spreadsheet, more concrete thinkers. And then there are people who are kind of random. And it's not that they're chaos agents, like that you have to be able to bring a sense of signal focus and simplicity to the chaos. But they're quite different kinds of people. There are others, but they're the two main types that I see. So even within like a small strategy department, you want to cobble together people with slightly different personality traits. They're going to need to be analytical, capable of lateral thinking, so putting two topics together to create new meaning. They're going to often need to be able to hold space for other people's ideas, such as the creative team's ideas, clients' ideas, etc. But they're the two main strands and some of the traits.
Very interesting. So you're splitting the two groups into people who are more logical and then people who are more creative. I wonder, what's the mix that you find of people that are more introverted versus extroverted? And you think one thrives more than the other in advertising?
Well, I think to be a strategist, you probably lean towards introversion because you need to be able to spend time by yourself.
Okay.
However, I have worked with extroverted strategists. The only research that I've come across has looked into the correlation between creativity and extroversion. And it suggests that based on the big five personality traits, to nerd out, that creativity and extroversion correlate a little bit. Right? Because there's something about wanting to get your ideas into the world. I'd say most strategists that I know, they would tend towards introversion, although a lot of them would even argue with the construct of introversion versus extroversion. It depends who you're around and if you're getting triggered. But you need to be comfortable with spending a bit of time in your head.
Now, let's say I am a 21 to 25-year-old. Maybe I just finished like a degree, like an undergrad in college. What would be the best path for me? Do you think I should apply to a creative agency? Or do you think I should approach, let's say, my friend's dad who maybe has a business and like offer them and be like, I can make a logo for you, I can do some marketing for you. Or secret option number 3,
yes.
Should I just like get out there, maybe start making videos on the internet and like call myself like a marketing consultant and try to just set up my own gig?
If you can do a bit of all three at any one time, I think that's useful. I think it's very hard to come straight out of college or university and get a strategy job. The research that we've done through our community, we've got about 20,000 people in it. Most people started in a different role. I was a digital producer, but back then we did a lot of strategy stuff, information architecture, user experience, which to me are strategic tasks because there weren't that many strategists back then. Many other people become account managers. And very early on, if you're managing a client when you're 22, 23, 24 years old, you work out whether you're getting bored by having to structure and having to be political and having to be polite all the time, as opposed to being really interested in the research or the focus groups if people are still doing focus groups and things like that. So getting your foot in the door is difficult. It does help to know people. It does help to have created stuff like online that people can see, because then people can send that to other people and hopefully you can get your foot in the door like that. Because unfortunately, and times have changed a little bit, just going to college, just going to college or university and having a CV, everyone's got that.
Yeah.
What makes you interesting is the stuff that you do outside of that. And unfortunately, some people might go, well, you know, I was just struggling to get through university. I'm minding a sick parent or something, and I understand that. So I don't want to say that this is the only way, but you want to demonstrate that you are interested in the world. You have taste. I don't mean that in a pretentious way, but you have a sense of what you're into and that you can put together ideas that get people's attention. And most CVs and most even student portfolios, they don't really grab your attention.
If I'm like 24 and let's say right now I'm unemployed, I'm back with my parents, which is the case for a lot of people right now.
Sure.
What is the kind of skill that I can develop? Let's say that I'm artistic. I understand that you're saying like you should just have some passions, and then if you have a passion, you'll do it anyway. You don't need to be told. But let's say I'm like interested in broadly everything. I'm thinking about maybe I can learn video editing. Maybe I could become a very good editor and just like start doing stop motion videography or something like that. Or I could learn social media and become like very good with like how YouTube and all these social media platforms work. Is there like a skill that you think like right now, especially in 2024, 2025, that you think would be very valuable, that you think would help someone stand out? Or do you think it's not about the skill and it's just like be good?
Well, I'd say even what you're describing, there are skills within those skills. So a lot of strategy people, when you get old, you think about first principles a lot. So largely what you're talking about, you might be talking about video editing, social media. Often you're talking about like writing, having ideas, doing some research, being able to tell a story, being able to get people's and keep people's attention with that story. They're sort of at the heart of any career in advertising. Even if you're not doing a strategic or a creative role, an account manager needs to be able to do those things. And from what I understand right now, especially since the pandemic and remote work, a lot of younger people are struggling with being articulate. And that can take time. Like, that can take a decade. Okay, it's not something you just necessarily turn on. But the way to become articulate is often through writing. So having a writing practice, I think, is really, really useful. Video editing, posting to an Instagram account, etc. Those things are tasks that bring your ability to understand the world and to write about it to life, right? And they help you learn, you get feedback, hopefully you make friends as well. But if you just think about the simple things at the heart of it, you don't get distracted by all the shiny new things, which I think a lot of, not to be like old versus young, a lot of younger people are looking for shortcuts. And I think a lot of young people have been told nonsense stories as well by college and university world, the education system. A lot of young people are not taught from a young age, like as kids, let alone as teenagers, to turn up the things that make them quirky and unique. A lot of it's like, how do I turn them off and then fit onto a CV?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then people often get exhausted studying. 10 years later, they're like, I used to love reading fiction. I should get a book. And like, why didn't I read for 10 years, right? Because the education system it's just not, it doesn't help the individual self-actualize, like to become more of who they could be. It helps them fit into an HR organizational chart, largely speaking.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the first principle things that I think are worth spending time on. And then if you want to do video, great, do video. If you want to do something else, great. That's just a format.
So find things that interest you and go after them. Develop the passion for it.
Yeah. How are you going to regret that ever in your life?
Yeah,
so
true.
Like in my 20s, I barely slept. I would often work 80 to 100 hours a week. And I was making a hip hop magazine. So I learned how to use the software to edit it. Had no money for photos or anything, so I had to work out how to get photos. I interviewed a lot of people. I had a lot of support as well. I sold advertising for it. And then I'd walk around Sydney, where I'm from, with boxes of magazines, putting them into the record stores, making my little paper invoices, trying to collect the money later. And I realized that when I left that life, like I'm a criminal, but when I left that life, in the advertising world, not a lot of people had done that sort of stuff. And it gave me credibility. I didn't even really talk about it because hip hop wasn't like a mainstream cool thing like it is now. It was something that people often look down upon actually outside of the US. So I didn't really talk about it, but I realized because people would tell me that there weren't that many strategists who had that kind of small business background. And sometimes I could use that small business background to talk to a CMO of a big company. Yeah. Right.
And I notice people who have experience, they love to see sort of young blood who, like people who are doing things. Yeah. They love to see, if you approach someone who's like, let's say 20 years senior, 30 years senior, and they have experience, and if you can come to them and you show them that you've done stuff,
yes,
they are 100 times more likely to respond to you and to sort of engage with you, versus if you just like hit someone up and you're like, hi, I would like to have a career in this. Could I get a coffee?
Straight up, that's it's annoying.
Yeah, it's annoying.
You know, I moved to the US from Sydney. In Sydney, I used to catch up with people all the time. And then in the US, I've been there for 13 years, you know, big ad agencies, and been doing my own thing for 8 years now. I would catch up with people in New York, but they'd been taught a different story. And I would sit down like, hey, what do you want to talk about? Like, hey, I'm looking forward to meeting you. Can I get a job?
Yeah.
What do I need to do to get a job?
Yeah.
And I get it, like, because it's difficult in these especially in the big countries. But that's not interesting to me. Yeah. You know, and so I stopped catching up with people because it was very transactional. Can I get an informational interview? Yeah. Like, that's not great. Yeah. It can work, and there are stories out there. And whenever I talk about informational interviews being annoying, people are like, oh, that's kind of mean, but it's just annoying. Yeah. Make something. Share the link with me of the thing you made that you're obsessed with. That's exciting. Like, look at my face now. I'm like, I'd be excited to see that. It's way more interesting. The other thing that can happen is some people who don't want to show initiative, they throw what I call passion tantrums. Okay. And so what a passion tantrum is, and my experience of it is, if I'm teaching or doing a talk, especially in a college, university, or even like an advertising school, at the end, I'm happy to have a chat with people, but I'll always get cornered by one or two people, and they just want to tell me how passionate they are about advertising. I'm so passionate. Can you help me get a job?
Yeah.
It's not how it works.
Yeah.
You know, send me something you've made. That's way more interesting to me. So I think you got to be aware when you're throwing passion tantrums, because it's such a waste of air.
Okay, so let's say I am a 25-year-old and I am very passionate, as you just said, but
Yeah.
I'm doing really cool things. Like maybe I have started my own brand, like maybe a clothing brand, maybe a sneakers brand, and I'm really interested in building that brand. But I'm also very interested in working with a big ad agency, because I want to get that experience and I want to like learn from the best, basically, for at least like 5 to 6 years, let's say.
Okay.
Can you explain just a little bit of like how an ads agency is structured? And you said that you started as an account planner, if I'm not mistaken.
I started as a digital producer in digital agencies.
Okay.
Yeah, when there weren't strategists, but the role in agencies like Leo Burnett or McCann Erickson or TBWA was traditionally called account planner.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I'm applying to one of these big creative agencies, what are like the main kind of teams that I need to know about?
Yeah, well, hang on. You can't just dangle the fact that you've created a company or two, because I would say to that person, keep going if you can. Keep going.
What if they like really want this career because it's like their dream?
Yeah.
They're very creative. They're doing their own thing, but they're like, no, I want to be with the best. I want to be with Leo Burnett in New York, for example, because I know I'm going to be around very smart people, and
Yeah.
I want to absorb that for a few years.
Sure. So the second thing that I start to think about is what I would call like career materialism.
Okay.
Right. So we can be materialistic in different ways, not just in material ways, but maybe you're trying to collect a mentor and then a coach. Oh, you need 3 mentors. Make it 7 mentors, and your CV and your portfolio and different career experiences. And then eventually, so I just think, because when people are spending a lot of time online these days, you're just seeing so many of other people's stories. So you collect them, and then you're like, what if I took a bit of their story and a bit of their story, and you're just hoarding, So I think be aware of that. And then also be aware of, and this is hard in the 20s, like you want it to happen in the 20s, and some people it happens for, like deeply artistic people it can happen for. But in your 20s, you're like, I just want to know who I am and what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. That can take into your 30s and 40s after crisis. And crisis and mistakes are the big teachers. Now, if they then want to work in advertising, the main departments that are out there, and everyone's shaping and reshaping differently right now, but you have account management. Their main job is to represent the business of the agency, but also to represent their client's interests within the agency. Not too much, because sometimes they just become a people pleaser for the client, and that can cause problems for the agency's business, right? So account management. You can have production in an agency. Often production is external. Production within an agency could involve anything from video editing to design to video directing and various other things. You then have a creative department, which can have a copywriter and an art director in various teams. And typically those teams have decades-long careers together. That's 10-year careers together, and they can move from agency to agency. Within strategy, you can have people who specialize in research, in quantitative things, so things to do with numbers, so data and analytics, for example. You can have people who focus a lot on a bit of research and creative briefs, so they'd be strategists or account planners. And then you can have people that are called communications planners. And communications planners look at media plans and try to work out how to make them more creative and more effective. There are other roles as well. Every agency is a little bit different. You're going to have a management layer, but they're the main departments that I see out there.
Strategy is a team that is most glamorized and is sort of put on a pedestal. Because
This is true.
When you hear the word strategy, you think, oh wow, these are the real guys that are in charge. These must be the guys that are really coming up with that core concept, and then everyone else is kind of like helping them execute.
Maybe.
Is that true or is that not true?
Look, if you want to be a strategist in an advertising agency, you can be a strategist in different kinds of you can be a strategist in different kinds of agencies. But if you want to be a strategist in an advertising agency, strategy needs to be strong, but not alpha. I believe you want the creative teams and the creative leadership, so the chief creative officer, they need to be alpha, because that is a way harder job than being a strategist. I don't necessarily see strategy as a glamorous role. I think it's very misunderstood and often not even known about. Is that English? Known about? It's not even known. But it needs to be forceful. And what's happened in the past 10 years in some companies is instead of being frontline, dealing with clients all the time, involved with a lot of the discussions, in some companies, strategists have become more back office.
Okay.
And what that looks like is an account manager doesn't let the strategist meet the client. An account manager will say, hey, we need an insight by 4 p.m. today. And then you say, would you like fries with that? So in some, I see that a lot in like PR agencies, probably the most, but you need the strategist to be very frontline, to have relationships with the clients. Whether it's glamorous or not, I'm not so sure.
Okay, so I have worked as a brand manager for a consumer goods company.
Yeah.
Now let's say that I am the brand manager for Mars, and I have a problem where I have now management has set up, let's say, new higher targets of sales that I need to reach, and I am sort of the main brand manager for the Mars bars, the Mars chocolate bar. And now what I need is for, let's say my ideal customer buys my Mars bar 1 to 2 times a week. But instead, now with the new targets, I want them to buy it a minimum of 3 times a week. So that's like my new business problem, let's say, where every single customer needs to buy an additional Mars bar. So that's 52 extra Mars bars that need to be sold per customer in the fiscal year.
Yep.
Now I have this business problem and I come to an advertising agency and I'm like, hi, Mark. Or I don't know if I'm dealing with the account planner and I'm like, okay, I have this business problem that I need an amazing campaign that's going to go viral. And I say that, sort of in a tongue-in-cheek way. And I need an additional
You don't say it in a tongue-in-cheek way. I see those briefs. And every year it's something different. Back in the day, it was this thing called subservient chicken that everyone was like, we need a subservient chicken. It was this campaign where you could interact with a chicken. I think was it for KFC? Yes, for KFC, I think. Crispin Porter developed it. I might be getting the brand wrong. And it was the first time it had ever been done. But you could interact with like a person dressed as a chicken through a screen. And so for the next year, every brief was, we need a subservient chicken. Yes. That's nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, you're not asking for something viral in an ironic or sarcastic way.
And there's always this thing for every year, there's like a new thing that then you see in all the creative briefs. So let's say I come to this ad agency and I'm like, okay, this is my business problem and this is like my commerce goal that I need to sell additional 52 Mars bars per year per customer. Okay, now how do you take that? First of all, if I come to you with that, what does the timeline on a project like that for you from the ad agency even look like? And second, how do you take this very business, very commerce goal and turn it into now an ad idea that is going to be something very human, that's going to make people feel, and that's going to make people buy?
Well, first of all, if you're dealing with a company like Mars, you're pitching against many other companies. I'd say a company like that could take, in a small market, let's be generous and say it could be a pitch that is about 4 to 6 weeks in length. In other markets, it could be months and months and months. And then what you find is the ideas you pitch are rarely the ideas that get made, right? So there's going to be a pitch phase to even have you award the job, unless we're already in your system, in which case often what's happening right now is you might be asking us as an agency who's on your roster to compete against a bunch of other agencies plus your internal team, and there can be different stakeholders with different vested interests about who they want to win. And then again, it could be a 2 to 4 week process to come up with ideas. It could be shorter. Everything's so different right now. Back in the day, it was months. Now it could be weeks, and I would hope that it's not days to respond to that kind of brief. If we're already clients, but you're Mars, so there's going to be some time to get sign-offs, I would expect a campaign like that, as far as a little bit of research into strategy and ideas. Like I would want, maybe this is too generous these days, I would want 4 to 8 weeks, right? Just to do a little bit of research, but then you need to be able to charge 4 to 8 weeks of work, which, everyone's trying to push their numbers down. If we're working a lot together, maybe it's like a much faster turnaround. And it depends on like how quote unquote agile you are and the agency is, because maybe that you're already making like work for them on social media and you're like, oh, that post did really well. What if we made it bigger? Okay. Mm-hmm. But 4 to 8 weeks, it could even be too much these days. And then the process, so first of all, what's been great over the past decade or so is there's a lot of really useful marketing sciences research. And a lot came from Australia and England. They seem to be the main places that these things get popularized. Other research happens in different parts of the world, but there's something about the English and the Australian, maybe advertising media environments that make famous celebrities out of some of the academics. And so I know that if you came to me and said, yeah, instead of selling 2 Mars bars per week, I want to sell 3, I can go, well, what does the research say about that generally speaking? And the research would suggest that maybe that's not the right goal, because what you need to do with a big brand like Mars is to reach a lot of people a lot of the time, especially the people who don't buy you very often at all. And if you can get them to buy from you, then you're probably more likely to be able to increase the sales, right? The way that you frame the question is how I would have thought about something like this 20 years ago.
Okay.
You know, and then you're thinking about customer lifetime value. What if we sold 30 Mars bars in blah, blah, blah to a particular person? What's that worth to us? And then can we justify the ad spend or media spend based on that? And it's definitely a way to see the world. But in some ways, the research that's out there right now suggests that advertising's never been more advertising. Reach a lot of people all of the time, especially with a brand like Mars or insurance, telcos, like brands that people can buy often or that they need to renew often. Reach a lot of people a lot of the time. Try to create campaigns that become famous, that are very emotional, not information and rational stuff per se. Very single-minded, not a lot of messages. And so that's sort of the principles that would come into play when we're responding to the brief. The next phase is you want to do a little bit of research. Now, I don't know how many people are doing like interviews or even focus groups, which focus groups have a bad rap. I've done a lot of them. I'm not the biggest fan. I prefer to do one-on-one interviews. But I have a bias towards qualitative research. So qualitative versus quantitative. Quantitative is numbers, qualitative is not. So I'm going to go through all the subreddits. I'm going to look at customer reviews. I'm looking for interesting phrases like, what do people like about Mars bars right now? Why are they buying them? Are they eating them in a different occasion? I'm just trying to understand that. And I'd like to have a few weeks to do that research, but it could be a day or something these days. And then from there, depending on who you're working with, you're trying to work out different strategic directions that you could take, right?
Yep.
So let's say on TikTok, you realize that Mars bars are being fried and then eaten the night before a certain religious holiday. It's like, that's interesting. What if we could somehow bring that to life, right? So you're sort of getting a sense of different directions you could take. You might also dig into the main perceptual problem, like why aren't people buying more Mars bars or any Mars bars, right? And that's another way to go, right? And then eventually you're writing a creative brief, talking to the creative team, well, hopefully you're talking to them throughout, briefing them, and then they're coming up with ideas, clients involved, so on and so forth. But that's like very quickly 60% of the pre-production process.
A lot of what you talked about just now is like, because there are so many constraints, like a budget constraint, there's a time constraint that you talked about, and there's of course pressure from the client because you need to turn around on this project fast, you need to come up with the ideas fast, you need to get into the research immediately. How do you balance being creative while having this like looming pressure of the deadlines and the client expectations,
Sure.
etc.? How do you sort of balance that?
Well, I think it starts with having a philosophy on this situation. And for me, the way to have a philosophy, I don't believe in the idea of balance with what we do, because creativity is necessarily chaotic. In some cultures, like even the gods of chaos are connected to creativity. And so there's a long history of creativity and chaos being associated. You don't necessarily want balance. You need to bring it into focus and to be able to get to like a simple message or a simple strategy. But the philosophy to make yourself feel a bit sane is to think of everything as a creative constraint. Let's say you want to put something on Instagram, you've got 5 minutes, you have a pen, you have a balloon. Cool, what can I do in 5 minutes with a pen and a balloon? All right, that can keep you sane through all the constraints that you mentioned. The challenge, however, is a lot of client organizations are set up in a very conservative, defensive way. a lot of client organizations these days I don't think are educated enough on creativity and the power of it. I don't know if this is still happening, but 20 years ago, Diageo, P&G, Unilever, and various others were really respected, I think, in the advertising world because they taught their brand managers about brand and about how to talk about ideas. And they had books on strategy, for example, internal books. I don't know how much of that's happening anymore, right?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Okay, so if I'm part of an ad agency, I understand that then it really depends on the agency of like how they deal with like what are their frameworks, like you were saying, what is like their process of like going through the research, then how quickly they usually turn around on those projects, what kind of budgets they can get, etc. So it really depends on the company culture of like how creative I can really be or how quickly I need to just get something out there, just brainstorm ideas and get something out there that kind of sticks. But on a personal level, what kind of life experiences do you think I can gain, or like what kind of life can I live where my brain is just more wired to look at the world in a creative way? Or is that a thing?
Oh, I mean, to a degree, that's just innate. It's something that someone's done since they were very young.
Can it be taught?
I guess so, but but I think it's innate. Like you can't not obsess. You can't not be into a particular YouTube channel or YouTuber or a subreddit thread, like your eyes light up. You know, I think a lot of the things, like you can teach the sort of practical and mechanical parts of being strategic or being creative. So for example, an idea, based on how Edward de Bono used to teach it, is at least two topics coming together that create new meaning. That new meaning creates new value. So you could take two things like a bottle of water, a pen, you can throw in a balloon and go, okay, how can I put those together? You can understand in a mechanical way how to be more creative, right? But if you don't wake up thinking about that stuff, or if you don't think about it in your sleep to be a little bit dramatic, I don't know. Are you going to do it? It's like you want to be an artist. You want to be an artist? Because artists have to be artists.
Yeah.
Or like the opposite can be like really bad, depression, resentment, bad lives, right? Yeah. So if you feel that you have to be creative, you're going to work out how to be creative. If you just like the idea of being creative, it's probably not enough to motivate you. I think you've got to be able to connect with a sense of almost desperation, maybe pain for some people, and joy, you know.
In your book, you have this one line which really resonated with me, and it's that strategy is an informed opinion on how to win. If strategy is an informed opinion, what that means is that probably if I am Mars and I go to 10 different strategists, they're probably going to come up with 10 different ideas of what's the correct way to win in a certain context, right? Every strategist is going to have a different opinion. Maybe the goal is the same, but they're all going to have different ways of getting there. So the question is, if I am a strategist and I have to, of course, I understand that I need to have the research and I need to know how the consumers are thinking, etc. But at the end of the day, I need to have my own opinion on how to win on this.
Yeah.
How do I convince my own team, myself, my client that my opinion is right? Because opinions are subjective, and then the business results we're trying to get to are very, very objective.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, also the challenge here is it's a team sport.
Yeah.
Right. So the probably one of the worst things you could do as a strategist is to use the word my or mine, me, I, is to use those words too much. Because you're working into typically you're working into a creative team, and they've got to use your brief. And if you're like briefing them and they don't even know what you've been thinking about or anything about your research, but you feel good, like you've cracked the brief, it's the right brief with the right insight, that's not fun. So I think you've got to cue yourself of the me, the I, when it comes to this kind of work. Because you could talk to a junior marketing client and they're like, oh, I was talking to a customer and they do this and this and that with the Mars bar. You're like, oh, that's amazing. I'm going to use some of those words in the brief because it's ours. So I think that's really, really important to address. Connected to what I just said there is, I don't think there's anything such as right and wrong. And I think being right or being wrong in strategy, I understand why people talk about it. I often hear people talk about this is the right problem or the right insight. Like, is it interesting or is it dull? Because you could be right and dull, wrong and interesting. Like, I'd rather be not wrong, but I'd rather be interesting with all this stuff. There has to be a sense of drama.
What I noticed from what you're saying is that these personalities that are very like obsessed and they're eccentric and they're strong, for lack of a better word, they also sound very unemployable. So when you as head of strategy are building teams, how do you take these like strong personalities but fit them within the confines of, like, for example, an ad agency where you do have like a responsibility to the client and, you know, work, like it's business as usual and work needs to get done?
You need a strong opinion. People who are too dominating can put people off as well. Especially, there can be this phase in a strategist's career where they just want to be right, because that's how they got through high school, it's how they got through college. Maybe they were good at exams, but they're just used to being right, dominating their way through the conversation at the dining table with their families. It's going to rub people the wrong way. So you have to work out how to have some strength, but most importantly about how to be useful. And typically in an advertising agency, you need to be useful to the creative team. Yes, you need to be able to generate revenue at times, but you need to be useful to the creative team. Otherwise, your career can just end, right? So yeah, I understand the traits that you're referring to. When you're cobbling together a team, you want people with different focuses. So like right now, if I was forming a team, I would want a couple of people who are absolute nerds about a particular music culture, absolute nerds about a subreddit, like a history subreddit. That would make me happy for no reason other than give me something to talk to them about. But I'm like, I just want to see people who would know a social platform, who would know a music genre, maybe even someone who's a little bit academic and is constantly studying culture and what's happening in the world and gender and things like that. So you want a smattering of those people. You want some people who are good with numbers. What I've found is, because I've had friends who've been head of data and analytics, and I've brought some of them into companies, and sometimes they just need a little bit of support to connect to the rest of the organization, because they're such truth seekers. They want to see the truth in the numbers. And it's like, okay, you can find the truth in the numbers, but we also need to work out how to translate this to a copywriter and an art director. Not to say they wouldn't understand it, but you know, 100 slides of numbers is going to need some kind of translation. The challenge that I've seen, especially in the US, is HR has become too strong. And so if you wanted to work in an agency that had a big automotive brand, they're looking for someone with 10 years of experience on an automotive brand in Detroit doing these 3 things. And it's just the best way to calcify a strategy team. Yeah. You know, to basically find a very specific tool for a very specific job. And then you just become more and more specific and less interesting as a strategy team.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
My final question for you, Mark, is, are there any tools or resources or anything exciting that you're using right now in your creative workflow? So this can be something maybe even like an interesting tool for market research, or maybe something even like, you know, you have these AI visualizing tools like DALL-E and Midjourney, and maybe to create like the visual concept, maybe you use something like that. Is there something that you think like now in 2024, you think people could really benefit from, have found that people are using in interesting ways?
Look, there are tools that I use in my own creative process because I publish a lot of stuff online, but I just think they can be a real distraction. So even if you look at the output of ChatGPT or artificial intelligence, verbal or visual right now, it's fine. What I would want a strategist to do, or someone who wants to be a strategist to do, is read 3 good books on writing. Like, let's make that the tool, and then practice writing, and then you'll be developing critical thinking tools, because to write well is to think well is to write well. Like, there's this reinforcing beautiful mechanism about thinking and writing and thinking and writing. And then the tools will come and go, and some will slow down, some will speed up. But I don't like focusing people on tools. I like them to focus on them.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. It was so nice speaking with you. Thank
Pleasure.
you so much. I really appreciate your time. And I'm just going to say that if anyone has any questions, please leave it in the comments, and maybe Mark will reply in the comments.
I will. I like your comment. Thanks for having me, Robbie.
Thank you so much. It was so nice speaking to you. Thank you.